Hello, everyone. This is the 155th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. Unfortunately, Mr. Paul Whittle from the 1888 letter block could not make it this time. For this episode, I interviewed Dutch football fan Mr. Paul Dekkers as we discuss PSV Eindhoven during the Bobby Robson era from 1990 to 1992. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you, Shahaz. Thank you for having me.
Let's go back in time. Can you describe the state of the affairs at PSV in the summer of 1990 following the departure of Gus Hiddink?
Yes, you have to think after some very successful seasons, starting with the 1985 1986 season, and winning four league titles, three domestic cups, and the European Champions Cup in 1988. The team was a bit in decline in the summer of 1990. The summer before, Ronald Koeman had already left, and the squad had become a bit, let's say, lazy, full up, and it was at the point that it should be renewed. Besides that, Guus Hiddink left the club and he would become the manager of Turkish side Fenerbahce. But that breakup was a bit painful as well at the same time because he openly criticized the board and some players, especially Gerald Vandenberg, in an interview with a magazine called Nieuwe Revue. And Gerald Vandenberg just signed a lifelong contract after rejecting a lucrative offer by AS Roma, by Italian side AS Roma. And Hiddink was also fined by the board for that interview. So the relationship was not that great anymore. Later they made up eventually. But yeah, some players, they had also become very unsatisfied, like striker Wim Kieft. He wanted to leave because he lost his place in the first 11 to Danish striker Flemming Poulsen. Defender Ivan Nielsen was not happy anymore, and Vandenberg was very much injured. So the situation at the squad was very restless. And despite an eclectic win against the Romanian side, Steaua Bucharest, in the European Champions Cup, they were thrashing them 5-1 at home. And winning the domestic cup against Vitesse Arnhem, there was not much to cheer about in 1990. Also because main rivals Ajax, they won the league title again for the first time in 5 years. So yeah, the situation was not very positive, let's say.
There were continuing reports that many of the players had quarrels with Romario. What
Yes.
was the truth about that?
Well, Romario was an extraordinary player and a fantastic goal scorer, but he was also a very stubborn guy. And he loved the nightlife and did not take top football too seriously. He fully relied on his talent and he decided many matches. That's why he got away with many things. But during training sessions, he was always very lazy. And some days he even showed up late or did not even show up at all. There's a funny anecdote about him. Like Romario was not used to cold Western European winters. And one day, during a freezing cold day, he did not show up at the training ground. And he called up the team manager, Mart van de Heuvel. And he said, like, my car is broken. I don't see anything. So Mart went to his house to take a look at the car. And it turned out that the window was simply frozen. And he could not open the door. And he had never seen snow before. But to come back to your question, yes, there were some quarrels between Romario and the other players, especially with the serious ones like goalkeeper Hans van Breukelen and captain Erik Gerets and Søren Lerby and Wim Kieft. They openly criticized him as well in an interview for being selfish and indisciplined. And as said, yeah, Romario was lazy and very unpredictable on the pitch. And at the start of the 1990-91 season, Romario was simply absent because of assumed private reasons. And manager Kees Ploegsma, he gave him permission to start 4 days later than the other players. But after Christmas holiday, he did not return from Rio de Janeiro in time either, where other people say arrived on time, and Romario came days later. Nobody knew actually where he was. There was no clear reason for that. And those other players, they could not accept that Romario got such a preferential treatment. And Romario then always said, I'm not everybody, I am Romario. And other players like Berry van Aalen and his friend Stan Hallex, they fully understood that Romario won games for them and gained money for the team. But like one day when he had to appear to Ploegsma in order to be punished, he would say, "Don't worry, Mister. Next Sunday we'll play Ajax and I'll score 2 goals." And so he did, and he did that more than once. But yes, there were some quarrels, and at the end, yeah, he did not get away with everything anymore.
You already touched up on Gus Hiddink leaving on somewhat bad terms. Do you think he wanted to leave, and what was the reaction of the fans once he left?
At first, he did not want to leave. There were long meetings between Hiddink and his manager, and he was sacked eventually by the board. I remember that Hiddink even wanted a legal case on that, but then he withdrew that. But in April 1990, there were some incidents between Hiddink and the board, and the chemistry was simply a bit over between Hiddink and the players, and also with the board. And after that, he got into negotiation with Fenerbahce. I don't really remember how the reaction on his departure was by the fans, but in my opinion, the fans also understood his departure. They were quite neutral towards him leaving. He had some successful seasons, but they also saw that the team was deteriorating a bit and the team needed a fresh face. And like I said before, Hiddink and the board, they spoke again with each other and they made up. And eventually he would become the PSV manager as well in 2002. Very, very successful. So up to now, he's still in good terms and in good relationship with the club. But eventually he was sacked, yeah. And they already promised, there was a verbal agreement to extend his contract until the summer of 1992. But then, yeah, they did not follow that verbal agreement. And there was a legal discussion about it. But at the end, he just accepted that he had to go away and he went to Fenerbahce.
In the summer of 1990, after his departure, surprisingly, the man chosen to lead PSV Eindhoven was the England manager, Bobby Robson. He had
Mm-hmm.
just led England to a fourth place finish in the 1990 World Cup in Italy and had left his post after 8 years on a high. Do you remember the general reaction once he was appointed?
Yeah, you cannot imagine nowadays that the England manager would become a PSV manager after a successful World Cup. But at that time, yeah, PSV was a big club in Europe, and it was time for a new era, and it was necessary for the club to take the club into smoother water after these golden years. So it was required that the new manager he created unity within the squad, and therefore, the board were looking for an experienced foreign manager. Actually, for a long time, a foreign manager was very useful in the Netherlands at PSV, but they needed an experienced foreign manager with an international reputation. And there were rumors with names of Sven-Göran Eriksson and Otto Rehhagel, who was at Werder Bremen at the time. But the club ended up with Bobby Robson, and then he would step down as the England manager after the 1990 World Cup. Robson himself, he was also looking for a job abroad with a bit less pressure and a lower profile. Being an England manager is maybe the toughest job in on earth. And Robson was a very charming person, as well with the press, as with the players and the fans. And I remember that his entrance was applauded with enthusiasm. After all, an England manager who reached the semi-final in the World Cup came in. It's not just somebody. However, the fans and also the press, they were not convinced by his appointment, because he still had this glow over him that tactically he was not brilliant. He was not considered to be a genius. But at that moment, it was not required at the club. Like I said, the club was restless and needed to be taken in smoother water. Was very restless. And I think Robson was the right man at that moment at the club.
He was given a 2 year contract. He said that his stated ambition was to win the league title so that PSV can have a chance to win the Champions Cup. He also felt that the fact that just about all the players spoke English was a plus.
True. Yes.
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 Let's discuss the transfer activity for this 1990-91 season. Soren Lerby, the Danish veteran, retired. Danish striker Flemming Paulsen joined Borussia Dortmund. Veteran defender Ivan Nilsson went back to Denmark to B1903. The unsettled Wim Kift, he joined French club Bordeaux. Michael Borobek joined Roda JC Kerkrade. So those were
Yes.
the departures. The arrivals included Romanian libero George Popescu from Universitatea Craiova, Ervin Koeman, brother of Ronald, and Johnny Bosman. Both of them came from Mechelen. And of course, Johnny Bosman, former Ajax player. Last time we discussed how a lot of the former Ajax players would eventually find their way back to PSV. Also, Peter Hoekstra from AVC Assen. Peter Hoekstra would do the opposite. He would join Ajax a few years later.
Yes, in the 95-96 season, yes.
That was a transfer activity. Before you give the impressions of this transfer activity, comings and goings, do you know if Bobby Robson himself was involved in any of these transfers, or was this done by the management before he came?
You have to take into account that Bobby Robson did not know much about Dutch football in general. Well, maybe not at all. I think he was not very much involved in these transfers. Kees Ploegsma was, and also Frank Arnesen, who would become the director. Yeah, they had a lot of power on that. And the transfer, there was not much transfer activity, especially if you compare it to nowadays, but they were quite logical because like Wim Kief wanted to leave. Let's bring in Johnny Bosman because he was like the kind of same striker. Ronald Koeman was replaced by Michel Boerenbach, which turned out not to be a success. He simply was not good enough to replace him. And that's why George Popescu came from Romania. And Aaron Koeman was also a very logical player to bring in the squad.
In fact, he was returning. I think he had a
He was
spell
returning,
previously, yeah, in the club.
especially in the early 80s. Yeah,
Yeah.
he came from Groningen, went to PSV, and then he left again. But Robson coming to the Netherlands was quite a culture shock to him as well, I think. Coming to the continent, he was not used to that, was not used to working in a different culture, in a different situation. So he fully relied on technical manager Frank Arnesen, and they got along very well with each other. Robson had a good relationship with the whole of his staff, with manager Kees Ploegsma, and also with his assistant manager Hans Doyer, which we will discuss later. And also, and what was very important, he got along very well with the players. But in the transfer activity, I think his influence was very much restricted at that time. They said, like, this is the squad, and you have to do it with that.
Yeah. Let's discuss the backbone of this squad for 1991 season.
Yes, well, in goal, you had like the experienced goalkeeper Hans van Breukelen, who won the European Championship in 1988 with the Dutch national team. And the reserve goalkeeper was Jan Nederberg, who was very successful at Roda JC. Then in defense, we had an experienced right back, the captain, Erik Gerrits, Belgian right back. There was Popescu. There was Stan Valks, who would later go to Portugal together with Bobby Robson to Sporting Lisbon. And Jan Heinze, a very experienced defense, actually. And players who were not very much in their youth anymore. Yeah, Popescu was still very young at that time, but not, yeah. And later went to Spurs, to Barcelona, etc. And there was also in defense, you had Jerry de Jong. There was a young player called Raymond Berends, the Czech international Josef Chovanec, but he was very much injured during the seasons that he was at PSV. And you had Adik Koot, who later went to play for Cannes as well, where he also played with Zinedine Zidane, actually. There was in midfield, there was Gerald Vanenberg, also a Dutch international who won the European Championship and who's recently signed a long life contract. But he was very much injured as well in the season before. There was Barry van Aalen, also one of the members of the Dutch national team in 1988. Edward Linskens, the midfielder who scored the famous equalizer in Madrid. And there was Erwin Koeman. And up front, we had like Romario and Johnny Bosman, who came from KV Mechelen. There was also the Zambian international Walia Kalusha. Jules Ellerman, who scored 2 great goals against Steaua Bucharest in the season before. And there was a young striker named Twan Schepers. And he got along very well with Romario because Romario and Bosman, it turned out that they would not be that complementary to each other. So Romario preferred, at the end of the season, he preferred to play up front with Twan Schepers, who worked very hard for him. Romario was very lazy, so he had someone to to do all the work for him. Yes. So that was the backbone of the team. And if you compare it with nowadays, the squad was very limited, actually. But they did not play many games, especially if you're eliminated in the European Cup very early.
And that's exactly what happened. PSV were eliminated in the first round of the Cup Winners' Cup, surprisingly by French side Montpellier, who included Carlos Valderrama and Laurent Blanc, among others. But definitely PSV would have been seen as favorites. And in fact, their stated ambition was that they had to make the quarterfinals as a minimum. But they lost at Montpellier 0-1, and they could only manage a scoreless tie in the return leg at home. Do you remember if Bobby Robson was attacked by the media for the elimination, or the Cup Winners' Cup was not seen as much of a priority for PSV?
Well, I remember, yeah, Jacob Zielwer scored the goal in Montpellier. The Montpellier squad also includes Wilbert Sufrein, the
Oh,
Dutch
yes,
international
yes. That's
who
right.
played, who
Yeah.
also was in the European
Yes.
Cup '88 squad of the Dutch national team. But I remember the two legs were taken very seriously because after the '88 campaign, the team had not been very successful in Europe. So one of the main goals for Robson was to have European success again. Yeah, they played in the European Cup Winners' Cup after winning the domestic cup last season against Vitesse Arnhem in the final. I remember it was received with a lot of disappointment, being eliminated in the first round against Montpellier, which was, with all the respect, quite an average side.
Yeah.
Although with some big names, like you said. But I don't remember that Bobby Robson was really blamed for the elimination from outside, from the press. But the criticism actually came from the inside. For example, striker Johnny Bosman, who was much criticized during the whole season, he did not understand why he was substituted in the second leg in Eindhoven when it was like 0-0 and they had to score a goal. Robson himself, he was not used to being openly criticized by his own players for his decisions. What he experienced was that suddenly there came substitutes who demanded explanations, was something that he was unfamiliar with. And moreover, his tactics were questioned all the time, also during these two matches. And that was not something that he was used to either. And if you win, it's not a big deal. But if you lose, yeah, then it's quite hard. So from the press, he was not very much. It was not his fault or something, but it was the first time that he was openly criticized within the squad himself.
Do you remember when this criticism of his choices and methods started?
I think it must have been around these games before, because in the league they were performing quite well, winning the first games. They lost one game against Ajax in October 1990
Oh yeah,
away,
the 3-1 match. Yeah, yeah.
3-1. Yes, but they were leading the league table quite comfortably. Later that season, they trashed Feyenoord 6-0 with a fantastic Romario scoring 4 goals. And at home, they beat Ajax 4-1. So nothing seemed to go wrong to reconquer the league title. However, in the spring of 1991, they unnecessarily lost points against FC Den Haag, 3-0 defeat away. Sparta Rotterdam, there was also a 1-0 defeat. Vitesse Arnhem, they had a 1-1 draw there, and they, after leading 3-1 5 minutes before the end of the game, they were leading 3-1 against MVV Maastricht, and they still drew 3-3. And at the other hand, Ajax, they were catching up. So before the last game, PSV lost 4-1 at Groningen, and the title seemed to be lost. But surprisingly, Ajax also lost on that same day away at Dick Advocaat's SVV.
Yeah.
What came with that is that there came more criticism as well, like tactically, like what are you doing? Why are you losing these games? So there was criticism. It increased, yeah.
There were reports that the PSV players did not respect Robson as a manager while acknowledging he was a decent man.
He was, as a person, he was very much respected by everyone. But they already knew at an early stage that Robson was not a tactical or revolutionary coach. He was more, yeah, the people manager. It was very much depending on the whims of Romario. So Ploegsma already knew by then that Robson would not be a long-term coach at PSV. But he was very much appreciated by the person as by the players as a person, being a decent and caring man, but not really respected as a manager. Romario did not really listen to him. He really said, like, yeah, you can say anything you want. I don't listen. And Barry van Aalen once stated, I really loved Bobby Robson, but the only thing that he ever taught me was speaking English. And that says it all. But people felt a lot of sympathy for him, also because he had to fight cancer. They discovered cancer in his bowels, I think, in his second season. And it was discovered in the autumn of 1991, and he had to be operated, I think it was at his stomach. And he was temporarily replaced by Huub Stevens, who later became a very successful manager. And he was working at the academy at that time. He was loved, but not respected in every way. Let's put it that way.
Among other things, Robson was blamed for not fixing Romario's continuous quarrels with the other players. Apparently, in interviews with the Dutch press, he showed a certain level of tactical naivete. Apparently, the Dutch press they expected like a clear, in-depth explanation of tactical decisions, and apparently Bobby Robson would just repeat things without explaining in detail what they were
Mm-hmm.
asking. And there seemed to be a lot of polite way of saying like none of your business, things like that, to end discussions in these
Mm-hmm.
matters. Robson himself felt that the players did not respect him, and I think Erwin Koeman and Van Breukelen criticized him in public, it seemed like.
Yes, that's
and
true.
and he wavered between 4-2-2 and 4-3-3. He was also criticized for not trying to learn Dutch.
I don't remember that it was a big problem because, yeah, like most of the players, they all spoke English. So I don't remember it was a big problem. But yeah, at that time, most players or coaches, they learned Dutch. That is true, as opposite to now. For example, Ronaldo Rosario de Lima, the Brazilian Ronaldo, he spoke Dutch. It's quite funny to still see an interview with him speaking Dutch very, very well, actually. And nowadays, it's you cannot imagine that. So I don't think he was very much criticized, but it was noticed by the press. They wrote about it. That is true. But as opposite to the vicious press that you had in England, Robson was treated with dignity by the Dutch press, I have to say. However, from the first moment, yeah, like you said, the press was also critical towards him when it came to tactical ability, his choices that he made. He was not very flexible. And the press, yeah, they claimed that PSV won the title not thanks to him, but more despite him. The role of Hans Doyer was very important in that.
In this league race, Ajax were very much the better team in the first half of the season, but in the second half of the season, PSV kind of caught up with them, and it went to the very last match of the season, a very dramatic finish. And in the meantime, they also lost in the semifinals of the Dutch Cup to Feyenoord 1-0. This final day was on June 16th, 1991.
In my memory, I think PSV were the better side in the first half of the season, and then they lost a lot of points. And Ajax, with a fantastic Dennis Bergkamp, they caught up with PSV in that second half. Yeah, they were like equal on points before the last game. After they both dramatically lost the week before, and the gap was exactly 2 goals in favor of PSV. And Ajax had to face Vitesse Arnhem at home, and PSV had to face FC Volendam also at home. And at halftime, they both led by 1-0. And then early in the second half, Ajax scored 2-0. So the tension was increasing at that moment. It became massive. And then PSV scored 2-0 and 3-0. And eventually they both won 3-0. But you have to think at that time, there were no mobile phones available. So everyone in the stadium was like listening to, including the players on the bench, were listening to some transistor radio, which could also be a delay in that. And they were all wondering what the score in the other stadium would be. And this was communicated to the players. But eventually, yeah, PSV won because they, with 2 goals, yeah, and won the title. Only a 2 goal favor. Yeah, that's incredible, actually. In the 2006-2007 season, there was a difference by 1 goal also when PSV won the league title. But at that time in 1991, they thought this is never going to happen again. Such a small difference. It was also criticized that, yeah, how can you become champions with only 2 goal difference? Shouldn't they have played
A
some
playoff or something. Yeah.
playoff match somewhere else, yeah, in Rotterdam, for example? That never happened, fortunately for PSV.
In the World Soccer magazine issue of August 1991, Simon Cooper claimed that Hans Dorhe had been the manager for this final match and not Robson at the behest of the players. How true was this and how was this reported in Netherlands at the time?
Hans Doyer was a very loyal and very competent assistant manager already at the time when he existed, Guus Hiddink. So he was a very important factor in the success. However, I remember Doyer was very ambitious and he wanted to be the head coach. And when Hiddink left or had to leave, Doyer, at the first time, he declared his solidarity. But the board, though, they persuaded him to stay and to assist Bobby Robson. And when things seemed to collapse on the pitch in the spring of 1991, it is true that Doyer became more and more involved and more dominant in the dressing room. And it hurt him a little bit that PSV never approached him to be the new head coach. And therefore, that's also the reason why he left the club in 1991 to become the head coach of Feyenoord. But in his autobiography, Goodbye But Not Farewell, Robson speaks very friendly about Doyer, naming him reliable and trustworthy. But I think that Simon Cooper, he's very right about that. I also remember his article, and he's good informed. He's very well informed. It's not up to me to discuss what Simon Cooper writes down now.
Apparently, the players had asked the Kees Ploegsma for the change, and Dorhe trained the team like 3 days before the match and picked the team. Later, Bobby Robson said that he was kind of hurt by this article because he felt it was not true. He said he knew Dorhe was moving. He felt that it was a good gesture to have him involved in this last match of the season. But so who knows what the truth is?
Eventually, everything turned out well for the team, and they both had to celebrate.
Yeah. You said that the team won in spite of Robson, almost by default. So do you think at the end of this first seasons, were the fans satisfied with Robson or did they want to change?
No, although it was a very close call, PSV reconquered the league title, and that was enough reason for the fans to be at least satisfied. And although there was a lot to be improved, there was no reason to replace Robson after one season. Besides that, PSV fans don't call for dismissal very easily. And they felt some sympathy as well for Robson as well. So during the honoring when they were celebrating the title, Robson thanked everyone in the Dutch language, which was very much appreciated. However, yeah, like we said before, the atmosphere was one of skepticism as well. Like, what's going to happen the next season, and is he going to be the right person?
We come to the 1991-92 season, his second season. Let's look at the transfer activity. Hans Dorhe, like you mentioned, he goes to become the Feyenoord manager. Frank Arnesen becomes the assistant manager to Bobby Robson. Other players to leave included the backup goalkeeper Jan Nederburg, Jones, Telstar, Adi Kut, Jones, Khan, and Zidane. Johnny Bozeman, after a disappointing season, he rejoins Ad de Mos at Anderlecht. We have to remember Ad de Mos had been his manager at Ajax and at Mechelen, so he knew him well. And he was convinced that Bozeman would recover at Anderlecht.
Which he did.
Yes. Raymond Behrens was loaned to RKC. Josef Kovanec, the Czech defender, he never really settled at PSV and he returned to Sparta Praha. As far as the arrivals, Ernest Faber arrived from Nijmegen, but he was then loaned to Sparta. Also, Dutch veteran defender, one of the heroes of the 1988 Euros, Adrie van Tigelen. He arrived from Anderlecht at a veteran stage of his career. But surprisingly, Wim Kieft also returned from Bordeaux. After one season at Bordeaux, he returned to PSV. Just like the first season, do you think in the second season Bobby Robson had any say in the transfer, or again it was the management, you think?
The manager, Ploegsma, was always very much in charge when it came to transfer activity. And the transfers were quite logical. I mean, Johnny Bosman goes, who would you want to replace him? Like the player who already played with Romania. So it was very logical that Wim Kieft rejoined PSV as well. And it needed a strong, experienced defender as well. So Arie van Tichelen came in, which was a very good signing at that moment, a very professional and experienced defender as well. Hansel was replaced by Frank Arnesen, who was, before that, was also the technical director. So he had a lot of influence as well, and he communicated very well with Robson as well. They understood each other. So I think that Robson very much approved those signings and then the transfer activity that happened off the pitch. But then again, it was not a shocking transfer activity. There were not big signings besides Kieft and Van Tigelen. So, but he had to improve the team. He was also supposed to improve the players that were already there at his disposal. So it was up to him to improve that. And if he succeeded, I'm not sure about that.
So the backbone of the team does not change much except arrivals
No.
of Van Tigelen and Kieft. This would be Eric Garris's final season before retiring.
Yeah, he was 38 by then, I think, when he retired.
How was Robson's handling of the press differ in this season compared to the first season, if at all?
Well, he felt more pressure, and he also showed that during press conferences. And the pressure became huge after the elimination by Anderlecht by Art de Mos, managed by Art de Mos, who would later become PSV coach in 1993. But Robson must have felt a lack of confidence by the board as well after that. There was no progress in the team. And without really saying it, the board blamed Robson for that. After all, it was his responsibility to have European success. But then again, the European campaign was very disappointing as well. And the press noted that. And that would be his fate, I think, that he already knew that his contract would not be extended. But he was like smacking around a bit more during press conferences. Yeah.
By November, it was obvious that because they failed in Europe, that his contract most likely would not be renewed.
Yeah, like I said, that European success was something the club had been longing for massively after winning the European Champions Cup. And they were very disappointing, actually, in those seasons. And in January 1992, after Robson had returned on the pitch following his operation, Robson and chairman Jacques Ruts had a meeting in Ruts' house. And Robson was informed that his contract would not be extended. And Robson asked, well, Jacques, are you not happy with me? And Robson replied, well, not at all, but this is the way it works on the continent, and we have to refresh once every 2 or 3 years. That's not really the truth, but it was a respectful way of saying, like, we're not very satisfied with you anymore. So it all happened with mutual respect, but the message itself was, of course, quite a harsh one. And Robson wanted to stay. He also says, like, it made me a better person working at PSV those 2 seasons. It was very useful for me.
PSV and Robson won the title again, this time with some points to spare. But I imagine for the management, the league title was a formality at this point. This was their sixth title in 7 seasons, I think. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
the players got the message. Yeah, the manager is not going to continue after this season, but that message did not distract the players from winning the league. And it was also the only trophy left to play for, especially after the 2-1 defeat in the domestic cup against Ajax. So the atmosphere in the squad was very good. There was unity. Romario also was very much injured during that season. I think he only played 14 matches in the Eredivisie season and scoring 9 goals. And maybe that was good for the squad as well. And maybe he had to do something with that as well, that there was unity in the squad. Eventually, they won the title quite easily in that season after a win in Groningen 2-1.
Looking back at these 2 seasons, what do you think were Robson's main errors, if any?
He did not commit any big errors, but if I have to name some of them, I think his main errors were that he underestimated working on a different continent, in a different culture, and a different environment in which players do not just adapt to his working style and do not accept easily every decision that he took. He had to explain everything to them. So the players came up to him, why are we doing this? He was not used to that. And he was not an inventing coach either. He could motivate players, but he did not improve players or his playing style. As opposite to Ajax coach back then, a very young Louis van Gaal, who included many young players, who made them better players, and who won the UEFA Cup in 1992. And I think that he also underestimated the importance of being successful in Europe. It may not be proven, but you have to think that English clubs had been excluded from playing in Europe for a couple of years after the disaster in Brussels in 1985. So in England, the league title was the only thing of besides the FA Cup, was the most important thing to play for. Yeah, his lack in Europe really was his fate, actually.
Would it be fair to say that clearly he did not take PSV to the next level, but he also didn't particularly weaken the side? It's just a stagnation.
Yeah, it was a stagnation. There was no
Yeah.
progress or improvement of the players nor the squad. So no young players were included in the squad. At the other hand, he did not get to spend a lot of money on new players either. However, if you win 2 league titles in a row, you deserve respect. And that's also what he got from the press, from the fans, and from the club itself. But yeah, not enough progress, let's say.
Was there a feeling that after 8 years as a national team manager, perhaps he needed some time to adjust to club football?
I can't say that he needed time to adjust, but I remember I watched a whole training session once, and there was actually nothing special about his training. It was really old fashioned, something that you and I would also do on a low amateur level, like just passing around, giving crosses, finishing, and so on. However, he was a great motivator and very enthusiastic, and he was also very approachable for everyone, also for the fans. And working on the headgang at PSV's training ground must have been a house of rest to him, as opposite to the stressful job that he had as an England manager. So, yeah, not sure about that, but
Mhm. He must have made somewhat of a good impression because he did return to PSV as a manager at the end of the decade for the 1998-99 season. That was a season that Feyenoord won the title. It was a different team and a different context. This time around, how was he received by the fans and how was this spell different?
like you said, in the summer of 98, Dick Advocaat, he won the title in 97, but they had an unsuccessful season in the 1997-1998 campaign. And Dick Advocaat left PSV for Rangers, and there was a complete exodus at the club. So main players like Jaap Stam, Arthur Newman, Philip Cocu, Boudewijn Zende, and Wim Jong, they all left the club. And the squad needed to be rebuilt again. And former player Erik Gerrard, who played under Robson before, he should be the man to take the lead in all of this. However, he was still under contract with Belgian side Club Brugge. Therefore, for one season, the club needed a caretaker manager, and they came up with Bobby Robson. Expectations were very low at that time, with a very young and stripped off squad. However, one young striker came in, signed from Heerenveen, that was Ruud van Nistelrooy. And he would be a lethal couple up front with Luc Niels. We all love Luc Niels at PSV. But it was a difficult season, though. And although they scored many goals, they also conceded many of them. Last day of the season, I remember by a complete miracle, they were 2-0 down at Utrecht in the 70th minute. They still won 3-2. And they finished third in the league, securing Champions League qualification. And Robson was very much appreciated for that result, and the club was very thankful to him. But the club could also not wait for Erik Gerrard to replace him. And Gerrard eventually turned out to be a very, very successful coach at PSV because they won the league title again in 2000 after he replaced Robson. He was very much appreciated, Robson, for that. It was not an easy job for him during that season, and they all knew that. He also knew that by himself.
After this, he would find his way to Newcastle and would have many successful seasons there
Yes.
at a late stage of his career. In closing, how are Bobby Robson's 2 seasons viewed by PSV fans and historians?
Well, to be honest, although everybody still remembers, loves, and hugely respects Sir Bobby, my name is Sir Bobby to end up with, at PSV, sports-wise, those 2 seasons are not being discussed a lot anymore by fans or historians. They are actually remembered as two, let's say, ordinary seasons, and because of the failure in Europe, actually. And we all wish we could give him more credit than that, but that simply is the way it is. Yeah, it's not being discussed a lot anymore.
Yeah,
Maybe
because he
unfortunately, because Sir Bobby, some of the young fans don't realize how big Sir Bobby actually is.
also he was unlucky to kind of pick up the team following the generation that had won the Champions Cup. Despite winning 2 league titles, winning a title was just the bare minimum at that point for PSV.
Yeah, that was actually the level that the club was at the moment. Yeah, that's true.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. All our respective contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So thank you once again, and hope to continue these discussions on football history.
Thank you, Shahan.
Thank you.
Thank you.